The photograph to me means teaching someone something they didn't know before. So trying to educate people about stuff that they weren't aware of before. So to me it's trying to find different angles to give people an eye that they wouldn't be able to see otherwise. I think that there used to be not as many photos out there. There was more impact by one photo, but for sure there are some photos that do stand out every year that are just amazing and incredible. I think as we get more saturated with the media, I think it's harder and harder to find those moments that people will be shocked into changing something because they've seen so much of it. I'm from New York City originally. I've been in the Middle East region for over 10 years now. And I came because I wanted to work on women's issues. And I thought that what was important to me was showing women who were making a difference in the world in a positive way, not just the stereotypes that you see, especially in the Middle East. But I thought that the Middle East would be a good place because there's so much attention that I could find stories and then be able to use that to attach to the news. Well, I mean, I think there actually are quite a few women photographers. I mean, not as many male photographers. And I wouldn't really consider myself a war photographer in that sense of the word. I don't do combat. I do conflict, but I'm not really interested in putting my life on the line on those kind of things. I don't do well in those situations. I will duck my head every single time instead of taking the photo. And there are some brilliant photographers that will go there and risk everything for those photos. And the women don't get as much, they have to kind of make more sacrifices in life to do those, their lives. So you don't see as many women, but the women that are out there are rock stars. The first day I was in the Middle East, I actually landed in Lebanon on February 14th, 2005, which is the day that Rafiq Hariri was assassinated. Literally, I come to the Middle East to do photojournalism and a bomb explodes and you have to decide which way to run, towards the massive explosion or away from the massive explosion. So I went towards it, and I figured out that I didn't do anything that day that sold. I didn't even know who Rafiq Hariri was at that point, literally had no idea what was happening. I realized that I was capable of doing that kind of stuff and that it was something that I could, I could probably do. And then I didn't spend very much time in Lebanon. I moved to Egypt. This is one of the first days of the revolution. This guy had been shot with pellets or bird pellets or something like bird shot. And he was being treated on the bridge near Tahrir. When I took this picture, I thought if anything happens to me and no one has any idea where I am, I'm gonna end up in like a hospital without a name and this kind of thing. So I found another AP photographer, and we ended up like spending most of the day together, because in case something happened to one of us, we needed to have someone else with us and make sure nothing would happen. The people in Tahrir took this picture and made it into a massive poster and hung it in Tahrir. It was like the biggest tear sheet I've ever had in my life, and it was pretty amazing. I like this because he was obviously wearing an old school gas mask, so I thought it was pretty. I saw him coming with it. I just waited because he looked so great with that on. I mean, these I didn't actually think were as risky, because like you knew the battle lines, like for the most part, the police stayed on one side, and then the protesters stayed on the other. So they did this, but there were very defined spaces, and so you could really work in those spaces pretty easily. Every once in a while they changed, but if you stayed there, you were okay. This photo was during the, I think this was when the Day of the Camels were like, and this was one of those moments where I was definitely in the wrong place. I got in the middle of, essentially I assumed that I walked in with the Mubarak supporters, and I assumed at some point when we got to the square that they would stop them, or the police would stop them, or the army would stop them, and then they would keep them separate. They didn't. And I kind of moved over to where the protesters were, and I realized that I was like almost right in the middle between the Mubarak supporters and the protesters. And it just became this thing where it started moving like this, and you just felt like you were in a wave that you couldn't, and it was just going to get bad, like right then. And I realized that I was probably gonna get trampled. And I put my camera on completely automatic, and I just held down the shutter. And this is another photographer, he fell on top of me, and these guys literally jumped over me as they were like running to beat out of the Mubarak supporters. That was outside of the presidential palace. This guy was dragged by the police. All his clothes were torn off of him, and they were beating him. I was taking this from a high vantage point, and pretty sure that they knew that we were up there. So afterwards, we had to stay there for a while to make sure that they wouldn't try to attack us when we came back down, having taken those pictures. This is the presidential palace, and they were continually attacking it for quite a while. There's definitely a lot of emotions in the funerals of the Arab world. They certainly, compared to the US, there's a lot more shown emotion, I think, especially with the women, sometimes with the men. This one obviously is men. I don't get that many men showing emotion like that. I think what makes a good picture is human emotion, something that you can relate to. Because I think that there are so many good pictures out there, so something that is stronger, that something you wouldn't expect. And also for me, something that makes you look more than once. Egypt has a special place in my heart because I really got my start there for photojournalism. I started stringing for Reuters, and that's how I got the job with the Associated Press. And it's, you know, been really good for my career to work there. I feel that I was there for the revolution, so I've kind of watched the highs and the lows and everything else that happens for that country. So I think that that's kind of, I feel sad about what's happening in Egypt now, and it's hard to watch people that know that are Egyptian who I can leave and feel like, you know, it's not my country, but I still do feel attached to it. I think what it's mostly made me realize is that what you see is only a very small percentage of what's there. So when I'm trying to photograph stuff and then the worst images are what you see, there's so much else that doesn't get shown. So, and I do the same thing. Like if I'm not in a country and I see like photos, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so horrible. And it's never that one little thing. It's always like so much more, but unless you're there, you don't understand. I've never been in a situation where everything is like that. It's always like this little piece and everything else is kind of left out. I always try to give like the more human side, like, or almost maybe a little more humor if possible in the situations that aren't like death and destruction, like where you have to take those photos as well. But like in Libya, I felt like there was a lot of personality in the rebels. I thought that was really interesting and, you know, kind of portrayed the youth and everything a different way. So I always try to give like a more human aspect if possible to show that like it's not just war, but there are people behind it. So this guy is like representative of what I thought of like the rebels and their fashion sense. Like it was like, this guy looks like he's straight out of Paris or something, and he's like holding this massive, I don't even know what the hell that is. Like that's probably one of those land-to-air missiles. And I think they just like the designs. They didn't know what they were like, you know, it's just like, why would you have that out like that? It's just like, looks like they're making fancy things out of the guns and stuff. They're just kids. They're not mercenaries. They're certainly like, they were just, you know, Libyans one day and rebels the next day. I love this guy. I saw him from a distance and I ran, like he was like walking with all this stuff, and I just like full sprinted to get a picture of him. Just knew that this was a really strong portrait, so it didn't matter if he was posing or not. And when you write the caption, you just say a portrait of, you know, like so-and-so. So it's clear that, you know, he's looking at the camera. I mean, he knows where I am. Yeah, they just like had all this access to weapons that they just had no idea what to do with. Like, and I certainly didn't know what they were supposed to be doing with them. I mean, if these are ones you shouldn't be messing with, these are red tipped. I didn't understand the difference at all. So, but there was a lot of that going around. These rebels are just like, I have a video of them dancing with their RPGs, like just up, like land-to-air missiles, and they're kind of doing this with it over their head. It's just like they had no idea what these things, and then just like the way that they're treating them are. You just see like how these rebels didn't really know what they were doing. Like this guy has an RPG resting on his foot. That is not what you're supposed to be doing with an RPG. Like that's the kind of thing that could explode. That's a pressure sensitive weapon, and I'm standing next to it, and I realized afterwards, like, you know, this was outside of an arms depot when we first got to the country, and like the way that they were treating the weapons, they just had no idea what they were doing with them. It was just, you know, kind of luck that they didn't explode something while people were standing there. It did happen afterwards. In Benghazi, an entire arms depot went up, probably because of something like this. I don't know what happened. Someone did something like with the RPG on their foot, and it exploded, and the entire place went up. It was like miles and miles of just exploded weapons. Crazy. It was like post-apocalyptic. Not probably the safest thing to walk around on either, because there was probably some stuff that hadn't exploded, but at that point, you know, that was the story. Once you're there and you have to cover it, it's really hard to like say no. Morgues are very hard to photograph well, I think, because at least for American media, showing too much gore isn't helpful. And like in the Arab world, people are like, look at this disembodied person, and you can't show that to Americans. They don't like that in their media. They need to show the things that are like human, but not really like overly grotesque. The things I've seen in Gaza, I've never seen anywhere else in the world. Like the crazy stuff that happens there, wouldn't believe it anywhere else in the world. This was Islamic Jihad women who were training with guns in Gaza. It was after the 2009 war. They wanted to feel like they could protect their homes. You know, I don't know how much they're really going to learn from it, but they were definitely earnest about feeling like they hadn't been able to protect their own homes during the last war, and they wanted to know how to be there and protect their family in a different way. I asked them to come and pose in one of their houses because I thought it was like kind of the contrast of the house and the guns. So this is a portrait of them. This is one of the many funerals that I covered in Gaza. I don't actually even remember this one, what in particular happened, but you know, what I try to do is spend more time with the women, because I think it's really important to show this part, the human aspect. And for me, the women are one of the hardest hit, you know, depending their entire lives are dependent on their men, and then their brother or their husband or their father dies and their entire life changes. The people there are amazing. They're really like the most resilient I've ever met, considering the situation that they live in and the stuff that they see every day. Is the fact that they're able to continue is, in my mind, I don't know that I would be able to do it at all. You know, they can't leave, and they're in this area that, you know, people die all the time, and they have a lot less access to every resource, and they still are able to continue to live. So this is after the 2009 war in Gaza, and there was a couple that was supposed to be getting married, and they had waited, and this was their house. That's the father of the groom. So this is the bride and the groom, and they were kind of making a makeshift wedding. And that's the bride in full bride regalia. I like this photo because it kind of reminded me of almost like a Japanese, like, there's something very not Gaza about this. And that's the groom helping his bride over the destroyed parts of their house to get to their new house. My challenge in terms of aftermath is not the day or the week after, because that everyone will cover. You know, they'll go to Gaza and see the destruction and then leave, and then people will forget about it. My challenge, I find, is to keep people's interest longer, to remember that there's still people who are rebuilding their lives and trying to do that in different ways. So like to find creative, because if you just like photos of destroyed buildings and things like this, it only goes so far, then everyone will have those pictures. So you have to find ways to make new stories that people will still be interested in for longer time, so that they can really see that there are people there still. Find the human stories. You find the people that are doing stuff differently, not the same thing about how horrible, but like I always try to find a positive story, someone who's taking the bad and making it better, because in those situations they're hard to find, but when they do, they're really usually very, very strong.